Welcome to Newcastle upon Tyne, where we are in the suburb of Jesmond, which is regarded as one of the most vibrant areas of this vibrant city. We're at the Royal Grammar School, which is an independent day school, the city's oldest educational institution, and we're here as the guests of the city's Rotary Club, which this year celebrates its centenary, with a fundraising motto for a variety of good causes, which is service above self. On our panel, Lord Patten, Chris Patten, has been variously Chairman of the Conservative Party, Governor of Hong Kong, European Commissioner for External Affairs, and until recently, Chairman of the BBC. He served as Chancellor of Newcastle University, and since 2003, he's been Chancellor of Oxford University. Andrea Leadsom worked as a banker before being elected to Parliament in 2010. She soon became a member of George Osborne's Treasury team, and then last year was moved to her present post as Minister for Energy and Climate Change. Emma Reynolds is fresh, if that's the right word, Emma, from Alan Johnson's Labour in for Britain battle bus. Until last year, she was in the shadow cabinet, but resigned after Jeremy Corbyn was elected as Labour leader, and she's now on the back benches. Dave Nellist used to sit on the Labour backbenches, but his support for the militant tendency more than 20 years ago led to his deselection. Since then, though he remains a close friend of Jeremy Corbyn, he's campaigned as a Trotskyist while working for the Citizens Advice Bureau, and he's the chairman of the Trade Unionist and Socialist coalition, TUSK. Our panel. And we'll go to our first question, please.
Nigel Bellis. In the light of today's announcement of substantial NHS trust deficits, is the NHS sustainable without tax increases or patient contributions?
Dave Nellist.
Well, I don't think it's a problem of overspending. I think it's a problem of underfunding and unrealistic Treasury targets. There's clearly an increase in demand amongst the elderly, and Emma and others have mentioned that. But there's also a disparity in how old people are living. In many cities, certainly in Coventry, we have a 15-year gap between the poorest and the richest areas. And diseases such as diabetes or breathing problems diseases, which affect a lot of people who've been in manual and working class occupations, take more money to treat and to look after. So I'm against this idea which Emma's raised about increasing taxation. I think there's a couple of areas where we could save money in the NHS. Firstly, we could cancel and bring in-house all the PFI contracts, and that would save us £2 billion a year. And secondly, we could nationalise the drug companies who leech off the NHS, and that would save us another £3 billion a year. And the final point I would make is that I think in the detail, I haven't had a chance to read all the announcements from today on this issue, but I think in the detail there's a question of agency costs. It's not surprising to me that after years of holding down public sector workers' wages, particularly in the health service, you've got legions of people leaving the health service, then being replaced by more expensive agency staff because the agencies have to make a profit. If we treated health workers, junior doctors and nurses properly, we wouldn't have legions of them leaving the health service.
You've all talked about increasing numbers of individuals for various reasons using the health service. Michael Gove today, in a very widely publicised speech, has spoken in this context about the impact, in his view, of staying in Europe, that the NHS would face additional burdens. He forecasts or says that with 5 countries seeking to be in the European Union, the UK population could increase by up to 5.2 million, he says, by 2030. And then he goes on to say, the idea of asking the NHS to look after a new group of patients equivalent in size to 4 Birminghams is clearly unsustainable. Dave Nellist.
This speech by Michael Gove is one of the reasons why TUSK was the third organisation which applied to the Electoral Commission to be the main opposition in this debate. So we could have a trade union and socialist sane argument about what are and are not EU issues, and this is not an EU issue, apart from the fact that most of those who've come from the European Union to work in this country tend to be young, tend to be less users of the health service. The real reason we're having a problem with public services is not the recent arrival of those from the EU. It's a 40-year history of a change in our economy. In 1973, coincidentally the year when the UK joined the EEC, this was one of the most equal countries on the planet. Changes of 40 years from Mrs. Thatcher and her 4 sons have mean we're now one of the most unequal. The difference is between 63% of the country's wealth going to working class families and their services to 50% today. That's £250 billion a year. 2.5 times the whole spending on the NHS. What we need is to rebalance the economy in taxation, in wealth production and distribution of that wealth in a socialist direction. Then we can quite easily solve the underfunding of essential public services without having these scare stories from Michael Gove.
Our next, please.
Simon Tillberg. In the light of the Brexit debate, is the credibility of our political class helped by historic references to a plausible World War III or indeed Adolf Hitler?
David Cameron made a speech. I think he didn't use World War III itself. He said it'd be more secure inside the European Union. Boris Johnson said Napoleon, Hitler, various people tried this out, the establishment, that is, of a single authority, and it ended tragically. The EU is an attempt to do this by different methods, which caused quite a furore. Dave Nellist.
Well, again, it's another example, as was the reference to the leader of ISIS being a supporter of the Out campaign, of an attempt to befuddle the debate with bluntly stupid remarks. Now, one of the problems, of course, is that on both sides of this debate, Out and Remain, it's led by Tories, by ex-Tories, by bankers, people who've actually got an overlapping agenda when it comes to things like austerity and the primary role of business and reducing workers' rights and all those sort of things. So if you've got that overlapping agenda, what comes out of it then is a more concentration on personalities. And that's why these two old ex-Etonians are going head-to-head on stupid arguments like this. This is far more serious than those sort of remarks. It is a decision once in a lifetime, one that working people should take seriously. The EU is policy made by 28 heads of state, 27 of which we did not elect. We should have a form of running economies and relationships where, as Tony Benn used to say, we know who is elected, what power they have, how they got that power, and at the end of the day, how we can get rid of them. And we can't get rid of those 27 heads of state. And the direction that the EU is taking is not down the road of World War III. Yes, it's talking more about militarisation. Yes, it has foreign policy spokesmen and so on. But fundamentally, it's creating a ground in which the biggest companies in the world and the biggest European companies can have the economies of scale so they can make bigger profits, and driving down the conditions of working people in order to do that. That's a far more important debate to have than whether the leader of ISIS thinks that it's a good idea or not that we exit the European Union on the 23rd of June.
To our next, please.
Judith Dancer, what, in your opinion, of the man-only policy at Muirfield Golf Club that has lost them the chance of hosting the Open?
The Royal and Ancient is called, the governing body of British football. That's the problem of being in Newcastle. British golf would not stage it there because it doesn't admit women. Dave Nellist.
Well, I support the decision not to play the Open at Muirfield for the obvious reasons. I think it was a 62% vote, and they have this rule of it having to be 2/3, so it wasn't just a straight 50-50 vote. But socialists have got a long history of opposing sexism. If I can just give the one example of George Lansbury, who went to prison in 1921 with councillors from Tower Hamlets because he refused to implement the cuts from the Liberal Tory coalition of the day, actually fought a by-election in Bow and Bromley in 1914, resigned and fought a by-election exactly on the issue of women's suffrage. So the idea that there should be equal treatment, whether it comes to voting, whether it comes to work, whether it comes to playing a sport and so on, is a thread that runs long and deep in the labour and trade union movement. I mean, the idea that men-only clubs or such things should still exist in the 21st century, just frankly is so absurd. I don't think I need to make any more points. I fully support the idea of not playing the game.
We'll go to our next question.
Lindsay James, Has the Supreme Court's ruling on the celebrity threesome injunction created a de facto privacy law in England?
This has caused a huge fuss because the newspapers concerned are up in arms at the judgment. It's a story that has surfaced elsewhere in the world, notably on websites, online, and it's about apparently 2 celebrities. It involves 3 individuals and olive oil. Is it effectively a privacy law being introduced, is the question. Dave Nellist.
That's the second time you've come to me straight away on a
Would you
easy
like me to
one
start?
to answer. I actually confess I haven't read the judgment or followed the case very closely. Again, I'm going to be honest, when you said early on about realising when I'd said a sufficiently short answer. And that's partly because I'm not bloody interested. And I don't think... And I don't think we should be, but it probably does, if I was to go away and do the research, illustrate the fact that if you've got celebrity status and the money, that you can buy privacy, which if you were somebody claiming income support and doing a couple of hours window cleaning on the side, I'm fairly sure the DWP would not respect that privacy, and you'd be investigated. So there are those sort of wider issues I could develop if we had unlimited time in the programme, but on the basic issue of what they get up to in their beds, I'm not bloody interested.
I'm not sure it was beds since olive oil was involved.
No one knows. Actually, quite a lot of people know, but those who do know can't speak, and those who don't know can't speak. Interestingly, if I may observe, when this kind of issue has come up before, audiences always massively applaud at what, Dave, you just said. Some of them are the same audiences that read the newspapers, that have those stories, because that's what sells the stories. I'm not saying anyone here, of course, of whom that could be true. I just note it in passing. I'm going to squeeze in one more question.
Mary Piggott, if the panellists could use their influence, who would they have as the next James Bond?
The next James Bond. I won't, I promise you, come... You know who James Bond is, Dave, but I won't come to you first. Emma Reynolds.
Idris Elba. First black James Bond.
Fine. Chris Patten.
Either Sam Steedon from South Ealing or Max Meikle from East Sheen in London, 2 of my 8-year-old grandsons who have moved, who have moved from looking at the Jedi to being passionate about James Bond. They know every James Bond film which is a PG, and I think they would be very, very good, witty, fairly out of control, but very good with motor vehicles.
Andrea.
So I'm going to deliberately try and buy back my son's friendship by saying Rory McIlroy.
Because you know he'd approve.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, Nellist.
Well, since Idris Elba's gone, I'm going to go for a Jeanette Bond. Well done. But I'll also make the point that I think MI5 and MI6 should be closed down. I'm one of the dozen Labour MPs, or in my case, ex-Labour MPs, who were investigated and spied on by MI5 in the 1980s, and I'm what's called a permitted participant in the Pitchford inquiry. Lord Justice Pitchford is conducting an inquiry into the roles of the James Bonds on domestic soil, when myself and a number of others were investigated, including the Lawrence family and so on. So if you'll forgive me ending on not quite a humorous note, I think we should investigate the powers of those organisations as well.
And leave... And there we have to leave the programme, I'm afraid, and leave Newcastle upon Tyne and the Royal Grammar School. Next week we're going to be in London. Now we're running out of time. Goodbye.